And what we would observe is that this has been the year of the great divergence. If we look at every equity market around the world, whether it is the US, the S&P 500, or Japan, Europe, or emerging markets, in every case, we find that earnings growth has been positive, but there has been a significant divergence between earnings growth and market performance. And what we'll also observe is that the earnings growth for the US was far and away much higher than every other market. And so this has been a year of significant divergences. And we would say that this divergence is really largely because of risk aversion and fear over a number of different factors, including rising interest rates, fears of rising protectionism, and also fears of recession, given that this has been a long cycle. But what we would also observe is that while this has been the year of divergence, we think 2019 could be a year of convergence. Whereas we find that there was a significant discrepancy between equity market earnings and equity market performance, we think because people became so bearish this year that when people find out that next year isn't quite as bad as they thought, the performance could actually be better than this year. Now, when we look at next year, we still believe that there is a clear argument why the US equity market remains the best source of risk-adjusted return. We feel that there is a narrower range of outcomes, most of which, from our perspective, are positive. Now, why do I like the US? I'm going to give you a few different reasons. One of them is that since 1990, any time in a calendar year, earnings growth is positive, and not only positive, but up 10% or more, we have seen a positive return. And although markets right now seem to be trying to test that rule, we actually do still expect that investors will get a positive return this year, given that they have also enjoyed earnings growing a near record level of 24% this year. And when we look into next year, as I'll explain shortly, because we still expect earnings to grow high single digits in 2019 as well, we still feel that there is more upside to come. Now, many investors have a concern that although growth has been high this year, that growth is slowing. And we absolutely share that view, that we think last quarter was the peak level of growth. We think that US earnings growth will have peaked at 25 or 26% and will decelerate from there. But what we have seen is that over time, for the US market since 1960, even after a quarterly peak in earnings, we find that the returns for the US market, whether we're talking about 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, or 24 months, on average, have still tended to be positive. The US, by the way, is also the most defensive market, typically outperforming all other markets when global growth is slowing. And so this is another reason why we like the US. I'd like to just, in closing, say a few words about emerging markets, because it is our second favorite market. And although as I said earlier, there is a wider range of outcomes in emerging markets. I would just point out what you see on this chart. And that is that there has been a huge disparity between the earnings growth of EM in 2018 and the actual market performance. The differential is a very big number, and a big number that we haven't really seen since the GFC 10 years ago. And when we look back at history, whenever there is a big disparity like that, we find that the following year, there is actually tending to be an overshoot the other way. And we think that while we can't see it today, there could very well be a rebound. And this is really because of one thing, which is that for any equity market, you have to not only look at the growth, but what is priced into the market. And because of the significant de-risking that we have seen in emerging markets and also for the US and every other global market, we think expectations are low. And when results are better than people expect, that may lead to market performance. I will just say also for EM that it is significantly cheaper, of course, than the US. And when you consider that currencies are also cheaper than they were at this previous point, that they were this cheap, there is a significant valuation disparity that could result in a rebound the other way. With that, I will just conclude and say that we feel, although this has been a year of de-risking, this has been also a year where expectations have been brought to a very low level. And there have been a lot of people talking about recession. And if that is not what we get in 2019, we think there could be a significant rally in risk assets.
投资一定有风险，基金投资有赚有赔。申购前应详阅投资人须知或公开说明书。